Welcome to the Collage Podcast, a production of Feed My Sheep. Feed My Sheep is a nonprofit in Temple, Texas that has a goal of feeding people that are hungry physically, spiritually, and emotionally. In this podcast, we discuss Scripture, and our hope is that you would be fed spiritually through the reading and discussing of His Word. We're glad you're here. Hello, and welcome to the Feed My Sheep podcast. Today we are discussing the faith of the Centurion in Matthew 8 and in Luke 7. I'm here with Jonah and Jeff, and Jonah is going to start us off by reading out of Matthew.
Yeah, so today in Matthew, we're going to be reading from, this is Matthew chapter 8, verses 5 through 13, and they read this way. When Jesus had entered Capernaum, a centurion came up to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed, suffering terribly." And Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" And the centurion replied, "Lord, I do not deserve to have you come under my roof, but just say the word and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority with soldiers under me. And I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed, and said to those following him, "Truly I tell you, I've not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. I say to you that many will come from the east and the west and will take their places at the feast with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven. But the subjects of the kingdom will be thrown outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth." And then Jesus said to the centurion, "Go, let it be done just as you believed it would." And his servant was healed at that moment.
Okay, and then Luke 7 says, when Jesus had finished saying all this to the people who were listening, he entered Capernaum. There a centurion servant, whom his master valued highly, was sick and about to die. The centurion heard of Jesus and sent some elders of the Jews to him, asking him to come and heal his servant. When they came to Jesus, they pleaded earnestly with him, "This man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue." So Jesus went with them. He was not far from the house when the centurion sent friends to say to him, "Lord, don't trouble yourself, for I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. That is why I did not even consider myself worthy to come to you. But say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I myself am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. I tell this one, go, and he goes, and that one, come, and he comes. I say to my servant, do this, and he does it." And when Jesus heard this, he was amazed at him. And he turned to the crowd following him and said, "I tell you, I have not found such great faith even in Israel." And the men who had been sent returned to the house and found the servant well. Okay. So I love these stories that we've all gone through with encounters of people with Jesus and the gospel. And as I was driving here this morning, I think as I was kind of thinking through that, what I thought was here at Feed My Sheep, you know, the slogan is "We see people, not problems." And I thought so much of the time when we come to the text, we often view this other person as a problem. And I thought, I think that's partly maybe what makes us different on this podcast, is that desire to see characters and people in a deeper story and what is really going on here. What are the details that we know? What are details that we have assumed our whole life about them? And how can we see all of these characters as people and not problems?
Agreed. And this one, I found it interesting today, like looking at the two different stories side by side. Okay, so like I've looked at one and I've looked at others. So for me, I find almost, for me, my interpretation, it's almost like two different events to me. Mm-hmm. So the Luke event looks very different in my mind in how it occurs than the Matthew one, because the Matthew one is the soldier himself went and talked to Jesus. The other one, it's almost business transactional at first to me. He sends his first group of people that's going to maybe get the highest. So it's interesting to me, like the net result is the same. Jesus is response is the same. But you're right. Like a lot of these, you look at the individual story, and it's almost the main character. Like in this one, you'd say the centurion soldier. It's almost problematic. They're kind of, why is this dude bothering Jesus with this? Why is the lady that was bleeding all these years, why is she messing this crowd up?
She's a problem.
She's a problem. And because he's on his way to somewhere else, and yet she interjects here. Why are these people that are blind hollering on the side of the road and everybody's telling them to shut up? And Jesus is like, no. Okay, so you do, it is interesting, and I would agree. If you kind of look, the characters are almost, everybody in the crowd could have come to the place of going, dude, what are you doing? Like, just get out of the way. Or like they would say, hey, shut up. They can look as if they were problems, but they're really not. And we're talking about those people now. And then mine, we'll look at, does it even matter that in one version that he sent himself, in another version he sent some officials, then he sent some friends. Does that matter in this to me at all? So we'll look at that later. But first is, are these people problems? They had problems. We get that, but are they problems? And then why does Jesus time after time after time after time after time stop what it looked like he was doing to interject in the stories of these problematic people?
I'm struck by Jesus's patience always. When you think about these stories and maybe that perspective of the disciples sort of being annoyed, like we have things to do, we've got to go. This isn't what he's doing right now. He didn't come for you. Just all of these things. And Jesus is so patient and just has a sense about him, like he has all the time in the world to be with this person. I think that shows just how much he loves us, and that we are more important. We are the mission. That it's not this, I have important places to be and things to do. On the discrepancies, I do see a difference because I too, reading them side by side, was a little bit like, wait, are these two different stories? Are they the same? Some of the stuff I found in commentaries, so Matthew is writing his gospel to a Jewish audience. And Luke, at the beginning of Luke, he's writing to Theophilus. I think Matthew is showing us that his readers, he wanted them to know that a Roman centurion was respectful of Jesus, that he saw something, or at least a centurion.
Sorry.
No, go ahead.
Just that the centurion had friends among the Jewish elders as well.
Yes, but that part's in Luke, right?
Was it in Luke?
Yeah, Luke is.
Luke is the elders. So
I'm jumping ahead.
No, it's cool. So Matthew having the Jewish audience to see that a centurion was respectful of Jesus, but Luke wanting Theophilus then to be aware that the Jewish people respected the soldier. So it's kind of like two different emphases maybe on what the writers see. That aspect of it, though, is really interesting to me, that these elders came for him. Here's what was really my biggest sort of takeaway for me in reading these two this week was, in my mind, I picture this guy as a Roman centurion, but it never, in the text, it never said he was Roman. It says he's a centurion. And so then I started digging and I was like, wait a minute. Like, I was picturing him as working for Rome and, everything, having the uniform, the armor, all of this stuff. And then when I dug a little bit more, it's quite possible that he was working for Herod, not Rome. And I was like, oh, that sort of changes how I see this interacting, especially when you see, if these characters, you've got the centurion with a sick servant or son, then you've got the crowd and Jesus. But if that crowd in Capernaum is Jewish, does it matter then, and does it change your view if this guy works for Herod instead of Rome? And that sort of, to be honest, kind of blew my mind, because I just had always pictured him as Roman.
Yep. And what's interesting, like, so then this is also in different texts, like in the English version. So both of mine would say a Roman centurion. But,
right.
I mean, so you look and you go like that, and you go, okay, two very different things. You go if he worked for here or there, and you go, okay, golly. Now, where I come on the deal is, it's interesting, like just interpretation at this juncture is, it matters to me, like in the story, whether he was there or whether he sent somebody to it. Mm-hmm. As far as your faith element, I don't know if that's, like, this is my interpretation. It's one thing to go out of your way to go find this guy who you think's going to help. It's another thing to send people to go do it for you.
But what if you're sending people to do it for you, and you're the guy that's working for Herod, whose dad tried to kill this guy?
Well, agreed too. Now that would be true.
Like, there's a lot of interpersonal relationships there that I'm like, oh man, that's tricky. If this is your job and you're over 100 soldiers, whether they're for Caesar or for Herod, but if they are for Herod, does it make sense to send somebody, or does it make sense to keep it more private? Like, would you trust?
True.
I don't know.
Now, and then let me ask, so out of this, so we got the guy, okay, so we got the soldier. He either A or B sends himself, or he sends soldiers to go get to Jesus to heal this servant of his that he found very valuable, which I find that's interesting. Like, I mean, so in of itself, and he goes out of his way, so he must have known, obviously, the power that Jesus had and what he could do. So that in itself is interesting. So then out of it, in this interaction, what would we say is he showing faith that Jesus had not seen anywhere before? Mm-hmm. Like, what in this like what is occurring here that Jesus would say, I've never seen a faith like this before. I look at this interaction and I'm trying to go, what is he seeing that is greater than anything he's ever seen before right here?
One thing that I find interesting, and it has to do with the Greek of the text. So the way that it's written, at least in the NIV, is that Jesus kind of poses this question to the centurion of...
Which one, in Matthew or Luke?
Let me see. I feel like I saw it in both.
Okay.
Maybe in Matthew only, though. Where he says, well, shall I come and heal him?
Yes, I had that
Maybe
note
that's
too.
only Matthew.
I made a nerdy little chart that compares the two. Hang on. I do think you're right.
Yeah, only Matthew.
Yeah, only Matthew says
Yeah.
it is a question in the Greek.
Yeah, in Matthew, the NIV, the English translation, it poses it as this question, shall I come and heal him? But in the Greek, it says something like, and he says to him, I having come will heal him. Or like the verb will heal is a future active indicative.
Yes, I wrote that too. I will come and heal him.
I will come and heal him. Mm-hmm. It's not this question.
I'm doing it now.
Yep.
I did it already.
Right. Which I think is interesting, and why the translators, and they're brilliant people who translate these texts. It's not just somebody making things up, but why do they choose to write that as a question? I think is a question that I have.
Some of the commentaries I read said they saw it as more of a, should I come and heal him? Highlighting the fact that a Gentile is asking a Jewish leader for help. And so on the centurion part, I guess I ultimately had a lot of questions. Who was he working for? Was it Rome? Was it Herod? But either way, he seems like a Gentile. Even if he's working for Herod, it seems like Herod hired non-Jewish people to be over his army. And so because of the way that Jesus says, I haven't found such great faith even in Israel. And it's in some ways almost, I hesitate to say this, but almost shaming the people in the crowd that would have been, maybe not shaming, but as maybe more of a door in saying, once again, the kingdom is a little bit bigger than what you expected and what you thought it would be. He has more faith than anything that I've seen here.
Yeah.
And what's interesting to me, like out of this, the baseline where I'm coming to, in our English translation, we're looking at 3 exact same texts that are very different. Like the one I would read out of mine says, I will come healing. So like if I was preaching on this, I would focus solely on that sentence alone. Now, Jonah's, in the same book that we're reading out of, a different translation poses it, and it changes the scenario as you would read it very differently. Shall I come heal him?
Yeah, asking, what do you want?
Yeah, no,
and
so
we find Jesus asking questions like that consistently. What do you want from me? What do you want me to do for them? You know,
both make sense. So then, like me, if I would, oh man, you know what? Here's what I got. This is Jesus. I will come heal him. You know, when and the paralytic at the pool of Bethsaida, what do you want me to do? You know, and so I'm like this. Oh, this is Jesus's response. Very different. The same outcome. Okay, so we're just looking at how, for me at this time, how careful you must be in reading Scripture and understanding that it can be translated very differently, very different ways. And we're only looking at 3 different slight English translations that can change a little bit. The story doesn't change, but like, I will come heal him is very different than shall I come heal him, and it's a whole different discussion. So like for me, I'm going, golly, I'd never heard the shall I.
I wonder if this would be an interesting study to see if, and I don't know this off the top of my head, but does Jesus, each time he asks the question, should I heal you? Do you want to be healed? Are those Gentiles? And is that showing maybe a greater barrier that a Gentile has to come over in terms of humility to say, I'm not a Jewish person. I have never followed him, but this guy's different. And so there's a sense maybe of humility. Like when you think about the big culture picture, Jews didn't like the Romans didn't like the Jews. There's a lot going on there just racially and culturally, and for a Gentile to look at a Jew maybe as less than, and a Jew maybe to be like, they're all unclean. And Jesus saying this, could it be an expression of, I'm going to ask you a question so that you can show me that you've got enough humility to overcome these racial barriers and come to me? I don't know. Do you know if it's just Gentiles?
I do not.
Oh, I'll look that up and get back.
That's an important, that would be a really interesting element to look into.
But so then either way, like we're at this, the soldier or his friends. Well, no, I guess we haven't really gotten anywhere. We got either the soldier or his friends or Jewish leaders at this point pose a question, and Jesus either responds, I will come heal him, or shall I come heal him? And we go from there. Okay, and again, out of that, and what was baffling to me is, why is this such a great show of faith? Is it because of his possible risk of, if he did work for Herod, oh man, that's big. Or if he's a Roman soldier.
Also big. I mean, either way.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me how Luke highlights this relationship that this centurion had with the Jewish elders of that area. So we don't know for sure, was he Roman? Was he working for Rome? Was he working for Herod? Really, and in many ways you could say that's the same, just because of the way Herod was working with Rome. But it does change the dynamic a little bit, but he seems to have this relationship with these elders in the town, and they said, this man deserves to have you do this because he loves our nation and has built our synagogue. That's fascinating to have, especially when you think about the religious leaders of this area and every other story. Like, they don't exactly go to bat for a lot of people, and it's fascinating to me that this Gentile, that they're like, no, like, he deserves this, Jesus. And also that in so many other stories, they are against Jesus and just this tension. But right here, they're almost like coming with this Gentile and being like, we know in some sense they have faith
Yeah. Okay.
in Jesus.
So then this is where I get bogged down a bit in the two stories, because like that, this transaction seems almost business-wise. Jesus,
I can see that.
help this guy out, because look what he's done. He built this temple
That's
for us.
true. Yeah.
Look, so that's not much faith to me. That is, look what this guy's done. He deserves this reward for, hey, he's not asking much. He's not asking to heal himself. He just wants his slave healed. And we ought to do it. And so then mine in it, this guy, he kind of, mine, if I'm just sitting on the sideline, I'm going, well, the guy sent his Jewish officials he knew, because they'd have the most stick with the Jewish guy, and he already had pull within that community.
Yeah. Was he savvy?
Yeah, he was a savvy businessman. So if I'm dealing with the city of a temple or what, but okay,
Careful.
You figure out who you would know that could help facilitate get the best answer from the person that you need an answer from. So you'd go, hey, I know Billy Joe over there, and he raises chickens, and over here, this person gets it. Because temple's not that hick, but whatever. But you
Hey,
would go
I have
that
chickens.
way. That's not much faith.
There's this term in Arabic called wasta, and that's like how you get things is with wasta.
And what does that mean?
Wasta.
Like connections
Connection.
or just, like it's
Relational
who you know, not what
savviness.
you know. Yeah, it's used a lot of times for like corrupt government officials, but it's kind of a sling term for just like,
So this
I
one
got
from-
wasta, I got connections.
Yeah, and so like that's what the Luke version feels as if at this juncture, the guy's smart.
What's interesting to me, and this is funny because we haven't even touched on it yet. This is also very like Western and modern of me, right? Does the servant not just deserve to be healed because he's just a guy, like he's a man,
Okay,
a person? It's like when they say,
Right.
"Oh, he's deserving of this," they're not talking about the servant.
Right.
They're talking about the centurion. He deserves for you to fix his property.
Totally agreed. What if the widow in the next scene, like, is she less deserving because she doesn't
Right.
have that wasta?
Yeah, right.
the
yeah,
Jewish
I
leaders.
think, and so that's what kind of I think articulates Jeff's point really well of like, oh, he's deserving of this, of you to fix this problem with his property, with his, it's like, hey, this man's truck broke down, and you're a really generous mechanic. You should go fix it because he's a good guy, basically, and he's done nice things.
Okay, the other very modern thing that bothers me in this text is looking at it from a liberation theology. Why doesn't Jesus let this servant go or do something for him to not just heal him, but get him out of being a slave? And
Yeah,
that's tough. I mean, that's a whole nother discussion.
It is like this interesting, because and it's funny you should point. We won't go to the next one, but like the widow that you're saying, the next one, the widow in Nain's one of my favorite ones, because in that, what does it say? His heart overflowed with compassion. In this one, we don't see the phrase, and his heart overflowed with compassion, which it did. He did a miracle, but then we have to come to he cures, because like this we go. The A or B, whatever, negotiated that you come do this. Jesus did it. But then he says, and the guy's answer, either form is, I tell my soldiers to do something, they do it. And so I get this concept, and I know you're the same.
I think that's the piece that I see Jesus seeing faith in him.
Okay.
Whereas there's a lot of unknowns about how did these Jewish elders see him. Are they just using wasta? Did they really believe that Jesus could heal him? Or is this completely transactional? I do something for you, you do something for me. But the fact that this man has this dialogue with Jesus and say like, look, I get it. Like I answer to people and I have people that answer to me. And the people that answer to me, I go tell them and they do it. And that, okay, when you think about the broader, I'd love to know what was going through that centurion's mind when he said all of this. Because it's easy for us 2,000 years later to see that in relation to the Trinity and think, okay, when Jesus is on earth, he is doing the Father's will. The Father tells him he does it, but also he commands healing. He commands the wind and the waves. Like he is over so much through power on earth. And is this centurion recognizing that in Jesus, of both him following God and commanding all of these other things? I don't know. I would love to know just what was going through that centurion's mind at that time, or was it just a pretty basic understanding of this is how leaders work, or, something like that? Or did he understand more, or was Jesus just using that to tell us of this bigger picture of his relationship with the Trinity?
Like for me, somebody who I really like leadership concepts, like this sentence, the centurion, if he said it, like, and he did in the Matthew version, he gets it. Like he's not negotiating anything at this juncture. Okay, so like that one in this version, that's what I'm saying. It's kind of like they're the same, but they're kind of different to me. Like he's all in. Like in this one, that's why it sort of matters to me in my head that he's there. Mm-hmm. He goes in person. He understands leadership. So mine, in the leadership model that we're following, it's one thing for me to, hey, Billy, you work for me. Go tell Jesus this for me. Mm-hmm. That's one thing. Going out of your way to go meet Jesus where he was at top. And then he comes and he says, hey, I get it, Jesus. Whatever you say, it's going to be. Because you're the man. Mm-hmm. But I know you answer to somebody, you get it, because you answer to somebody even above you and what they say. So then he would get this concept that's going on. And he's saying, I'm just putting it all on the table right here. You know what? I know you can do this. If you say it, it's done. Mm-hmm. It's done.
I want to look, I know this is super nerdy, but I want to look again at the Greek word for who this person is that's being healed. So the word uses pais, which it says here, the noun pais means little one or low one in rank, subordinate or junior. It could be used to denote slaves or people of lower social standing, but it was most commonly used as a word for child, but not like a child like a legitimate son or daughter, but an illegitimate son or daughter. And
read that again. Tell the definition again.
So the noun pais means little one or low one in rank, subordinate or junior. It could be used to denote slaves or folks of lower social standing, but mostly it was utilized as a common word for child, yet a child in the sense of being of lower authority than a parent or master. Then it goes on to say more commonly like an illegitimate child. The word used for slave consistently throughout the New Testament is doulos, which is truly like a slave of someone. But then there's also this note here where it talks about this could refer to like an older servant, like a senior adult who is still in that servant status, is also another use of the word pais. But it adds this interesting element to the conversation of, is this what we would refer to as an illegitimate child of the centurion?
That makes me think maybe even more. So we didn't read this passage, but is it then connected to the John 4 guy? Because that one specifically says son.
My son.
Yeah. And so is this all the same story? Are those different ones? I'm not totally sure. That also makes me think of The Chosen. I know we've talked about this several times, but The Chosen depicts this as an illegitimate child of a Roman soldier. I'm still not convinced he's a Roman soldier.
Yeah.
I don't know. Part of that too, the Roman versus working for Rome versus working for Herod, was in this area at that time. I think it was Antipas. I'm looking at my notes. Yes. So basically Herod's puppet king, Herod Antipas, is over this region. But what was pretty fascinating to me was at this time, there was no direct Roman rule over that area. It was so what I was reading was, don't picture all of these Romans guarding every corner, marching up and down the streets like this occupation, like actually we see in The Chosen or some of these other areas that had not happened yet. It was like they sort of had this land, but it was like almost we don't have time to send soldiers there. We're putting Herod in charge. You can run it, but you do everything we tell you to. Mm-hmm. And so there weren't even Roman roads built yet in this area. They were all dusty dirt roads and things like that. So that changed a lot for me, I guess, the way I see it in my head of, like this region is different than like where Jerusalem is and stuff, that would have been under Roman rules. Anyway, all that, sorry, that was a bit of a tangent from the sun.
No, it's fine. I think when we talk about like the faith of this man, like why is Jesus so convinced by his faith? We're called the Wondrous Podcast. We're allowed to speculate. If you have problems, email Jeff at feedmysheeptemple.org. But if this is an illegitimate child of this man, he's likely married, likely has other children, has high social status in the community. Mm-hmm. And
even Jewish.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And his Jewish friends, these elders, probably think he's at least an upstanding man. Mm-hmm. His illegitimate child falls sick. He knows about the child. Maybe his wife doesn't. Maybe his community doesn't, but he does. Mm-hmm. And he's like, I have to do something about this. And so I'm going to have to expose myself to my friends, to my community, to my family, to my wife, potentially, and go before Jesus and say, hey, could you heal this pais?
Bigger, deeper theological question.
Yeah.
Do you think this relationship with this soldier and his possibly illegitimate child being grafted into his family is a bigger picture of this soldier being grafted into the kingdom?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it could be. It very much could be. And so then this man, when he shows his faith by coming forward in this way.
And his humility, I think that's really important piece.
Good. So then what is going on? We must look deeper because Jesus saw something in the story. I'm not speculating he saw something in the story. It says he saw something that amazed him. Yeah. Unless you look deeper in this, and we're not, these are just, we weren't there. We're just saying there's something that occurs because the story, my point is, if you just look at it on surface, it's not that amazing at this juncture. To me.
I do know that I think it was this story and the Canaanite woman in Matthew that comes to Jesus and asks her to heal her daughter that has demons. If I remember right, these two stories are the only two where Jesus heals and he's not there touching that person in their presence, that he just says a word and it's done. And that's fascinating to me that both of those are Gentiles. In that context, just that they have the faith in a person that is not of their culture context to go to this man and faith that he doesn't even have to touch or do anything. He can just say a word and it will be done.
It's not just, hey, we're here. It's a long walk to my house and I trust that you can take care of this matter here with your magic. It's, I'm not worthy of you to come into my house.
Yes.
So then that creates this dynamic, and I think it reinforces our questions of, is he a Gentile? And he says, I know that I'm unclean to you, and so you do not need to come into my house.
There's some compassion
I'm going to show honor toward you in that way. Or, I'm not worthy because this is my illegitimate child that no one else knew about before now. And I'm sitting in the midst of my sin, my shame, the fact that, I don't know, I'm speculating, but like the fact that I've abandoned potentially this child until this point.
I do think that it highlights his humility, particularly as a Gentile, to come. And like you're saying, just all that he had to overcome socially to get to this point in saying, like, you know what, if everybody knows my dirty laundry, it's worth it this guy is worth it.
Yeah.
And you actually kind of see that with the Canaanite woman too. That's a tough interaction. And Jesus says, I didn't, basically,
I didn't come for the dogs.
Yeah, I didn't come for the dogs, which I think is a term that we hear really differently than I believe the context was then. But she has both humility, like this centurion, to sort of say, like, you're right, I don't deserve it, but even the dogs get the crumbs. And so if you could just say a word, I know it'll be done. You don't have to bother yourself with coming to the house, making yourself unclean, doing all these things. But if you could just say the word, I know that you could do it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I know you can do it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And to which Jesus is kind of brain explosion. Like,
Which is wild too, just in
Yeah.
his humanity, that he's surprised.
it says, the Greek says he marveled.
Yes.
He marveled at this.
That's pretty mind-blowing to think that, honestly, Jesus marvels at anybody's faith.
Mm-hmm.
I have so many questions about that.
Okay, this one I will also say, just for me, can be a struggle as well for me. So then y'all help me out with this, in that, okay, this guy comes to Jesus with this great show of faith, but how many times do we seem to go to Jesus as well now in our modern day? Like me, I go, man, I think I'm coming to him in faith. I'm not amazing him at all. And I don't get quite the answer that I wanted. So
good.
like this, so mine, I've seen this same text on one side, okay, it's very strong. Another side can really, really be a spiritual struggle for some, because let's just pretend I've got a loved one. So that we're just talking now, I've got a loved one, but that's not pretend. Okay, so but I have a loved one that I want to be healed. And I go to Jesus, I think. Okay, I mean, he doesn't walk here among me right now, but I go to him. Okay, this is one that I've met with a lot of people, and we've talked about. I go to them, and yet they still die from cancer.
Yeah.
So then I didn't amaze Jesus with my faith. And I go, so
That's
like
good.
mine, and then you go, golly. Not saying that's what the text, but like you can look at this and you go,
Was my faith not amazing?
was
to you?
my faith not amazing?
But okay, I hear you, and I have felt
No,
that
okay,
myself too.
fair.
Absolutely. I struggle with seeing that as something that is always in every situation, because I think about, say, Lazarus. Now, Jesus ultimately did bring him back from the dead, but Lazarus, who's seemingly one of Jesus's best
Fair.
friends, did he not have enough faith? Or, I mean, we don't really know that. They sent word, the sisters, he's sick, like, so they seemed to believe. But was that not enough from his closest friends? I don't.
And even
I
they-
don't know that it can apply to every situation, that for whatever reason God has
Agreed.
different plans. And I too wonder how many people were sick, like the woman bleeding, that Jesus did walk by, that we don't know.
Here's what's challenging for me, though, and we've talked about this before, and I'm not trying to make a blanket statement of any kind. I'm just like, if I'm wrestling in the theological conviction and conundrum that Jeff is putting on the table.
Why does he allow suffering?
Yeah, but also there's never an instance in which someone in the text comes to Jesus and asks for healing and he says no.
Fair.
And I don't know what to do with that. That's a hard one. There's this theological kind of question I live my life with, and my close-knit community, if any of them are listening to this, they've heard me say this 100 times. And it's like kind of one of the struggle questions of my life. I do think God has been extremely good to me in my life. But a question that I have to ask, and I think we all have to ask, is if God is not good to me in the way that I expect for God to be good to me, is God still good? Or if God is not good to me, is God still good? And I think that's one of the really challenging theophany-related questions that we have to ask in our lives. Is the goodness of God in the life of Karen, in the life of Jeff, enough for me to say God is good? Even in moments in my life where I'm like, hey, God hasn't been good to me. You know?
I think the one, I guess, verse or thing that my brain always comes back to in those moments is just that his ways are not my ways. And there's so much that I don't know. And there is a borderline audacity for us to shake our fists at God and be mad at him. And I mean, in some ways that's righteous. We see Job do that, and God did not condemn him for doing it.
Yeah.
But there's also a sense, there's a great quote, I wish I could remember it, from C.S. Lewis, but it's basically saying, like, when we go to God and we shake our fist at him and we question, like Job, there's something about getting in his presence that when we do, all these questions die away and it doesn't matter anymore. I struggle to live in that every day. And I don't do that well. There are times where I have, and I receive that peace, but that's a struggle for me to live there every moment of every day and rest in that.
We, my wife and I she's experienced several miscarriages, over the course of our marriage, and we've been blessed to adopt 2 beautiful girls. But we're also living life right now alongside a lot of friends our age who are just drowning in babies. And it's a challenge sometimes, especially for her, to journey alongside her closest friends as they're doing the baby thing. And we've been privileged enough to do the baby thing with kids in foster care and stuff like that, which is fun. But it's really hard for her. Like, it's really challenging. And we've had to have conversations about, like, this is so hard and so painful and so frustrating. And, like, we can express a certain degree of anger toward God. But also we have the privilege of living life intimately alongside our friends and their children, like, so closely, and, like, watching their kids grow up and holding them and changing them and helping them take their first steps. And no, we're not like their parents, in the midst of it. But God has been so good to them and subsequently good to us in the same way. And I think we've had to reframe, like, the goodness of God in that area in our lives, And so, I don't know. I think
maybe that reframing is similar to what we see here in this story of just the expansion of the kingdom of what family means.
Right.
And how much bigger it is than what we originally thought.
And that Jesus cares for the suffering of the unnamed servant. Of, like, the servant or illegitimate child or whoever that person is, that does not matter. This is about the centurion. He is the center of this story, and he's the center of every sermon ever preached about this story. But Jesus expresses a great degree of compassion, maybe on behalf of this man's faith, for this person who doesn't get a name.
That's right. So I think that's beautiful. Like, so to what we're doing here, out of that, what are we talking about today?
I don't know.
Thousands of years. we're thousands of years from this moment. Okay. Does it matter that I don't know the servant's name? Not at all. It matters that Jesus knew what was going on with that person, and he interjected on their behalf. And we talk about it today.
Jesus knew their name.
They did, for sure.
Jesus, like, in Jesus' mind, he's like, that's Isaiah.
Yeah. And I know how much they suffer.
Like, that's,
That's right. And so you look at that and you go, at the end of it, that's where it come to. It says, you know what? they're healed. And then that's Jesus. And then you're going, wow, even today, like I may be in my faith journey. So this is, for mine, this is a challenging faith topic for me. And so for me, it's, am I Mary or Martha that's going, Jesus, if you just would have been here, you could have done something.
Yeah.
I sent for you. I did everything I was supposed to do, and you didn't even come when I asked for you. Okay. And then am I that, or am I this person here that's going, I'm all in. And I don't know what. I do know people a little bit, something more is under the surface than what we're seeing here for this guy. He is all in. Okay, and if it's what Jonah respect, that it may be this story that, you know what, I am that desperate that I'm laying everything out for everybody to see. I don't even care. My job, it may be gone tomorrow because I'm not supposed to be talking to you. You may even kill me because I've had my boss, if it's this other one, he tried to kill you earlier and I may be dead. My soldiers ain't going to follow me anymore. My wife is gone. My house is gone. My family's gone. Everything's gone. But I hurt so bad for this person that I can't watch them suffer. And I know you are it. There's something more.
You go ahead. You go first.
I was just going to say, it's a interesting dynamic to me to think about when Matthew and Luke were written, and you fast forward to maybe a person in the first century reading this, let's say 80s, 90s. Jerusalem has fallen. There's no more temple. Everybody's scattered. And the house churches are filled with half Jews, half Gentiles that are constantly fighting with each other. And what a crazy role reversal to be a Jew in that situation, reading the story that this guy Matthew wrote down and being like, all of my family are slaves now to Rome. Like, we got taken up, and this is now our position. But just the power dynamic shift that happened just in history for this group of people then to look back, and did that change their view of the expansion of the kingdom to see this, but also their compassion for each other, whether they were Jews or Gentiles? And did the problem of humanity bring them all together to go back and read the story and see kind of a role reversal?
I think for me too, it's a good reminder, and I may have talked about this before on the podcast, but the idea that we are the answer to people's prayers sometimes. And just thinking about this person, this child, this servant, whoever they are, they were probably praying about what was going on too, and really defeated and exhausted and facing death, and praying that God would heal them. And the centurion gets up the gumption. There's a few other words you could use to do something about it. And is an answer to the prayers of the servant. And for each of us, in ways that we ought to be answers to the prayers of our friends, our family, people around us, and our willingness to allow God to use us to be an answer to prayer. And maybe it's, sometimes the answer to that prayer is just going to God on behalf of someone. Here, Karen's stomach just growled.
Sorry,
really
that
loud.
is my stomach that has now entered the podcast.
That's good. But are we willing to go to God on behalf of those who are around us suffering? And maybe it's just we tussle with God about this person, on behalf of them. Of I am really hurting for my friend so-and-so, God, who's really struggling and experiencing a lot of pain. And would you just look upon them? Would you just see them in the midst of what they're experiencing? And that maybe that's enough. That we just ask God to bring God's hand and attention to that person. Which I think God subsequently, when we pray, it's not about, convincing God to do something, but it's about bringing us closer to the reality of God's heart for that person. And ultimately, God may say, yeah, you should probably take care of them.
Mm-hmm.
You should probably come close to them and bring them a meal and sit with them, you know.
Where is he calling us, like in this, when you look at the characters of the story, I think at some point the Spirit moved those religious leaders to befriend this centurion so that all these relationships the ground was prepped for this story to happen. And so even them having an unlikely friendship, whether he was working for Rome or working for Herod, he's a Gentile either way. And so he probably, I mean, just you think about today and racial situations and problems like that of just like, who would you not want in your home? And who would you feel like makes you unclean? Who would you feel like just, I don't, you know, if I have this person in my home, it's going to add all this extra work, or I just don't want to deal with that. But at some point, there's a friendship going, and maybe it was all transactional. Maybe it was just strictly business. But either way, there was some humility on both parts to meet in this relationship. And where is God asking us today to posture ourselves in humility, to befriend somebody that we wouldn't normally, to, like you said, go and advocate for the least of these to God, that maybe that's what he's calling us to do.
Okay. So, getting to the end, here we are thousands of years later in Little Temple, Texas. Okay, 3 just individuals sitting here looking at, and what I like on this is we can look at the Scripture is for each of us, you know, and we can look at it. In this story, we may see it slightly different. We may see it slightly the same. Okay, at the end of the day, the question at hand is just for us, personal takeaway from this story and Scripture for you. What it means to you in your life today and now, and why is it relevant in your life today? And then that may be somebody else, I don't know. But so Jonah, your takeaway from this overarching thing, and then your takeaway and how it's relevant to your life today.
This is less prepared, I guess. I'm thinking and responding to that question. Do I have the faith to trust that Jesus cares deeply for the things in my life that I need him for? Will I boldly ask and trust that he can do something about those things? I think is a question that this leads me to, of like, yeah, like, will I go to him, like, with the bold questions? Will I humble myself, as we talked about, and say, you know, I could try to figure this out on my own and work really hard to do this thing, to move this thing, to make this thing happen. But will I humble myself and say, no, like, Jesus has this. And he's known about this way longer than I ever have. And he's had the solution to this, whether it's a solution I want or not, way longer than I've ever even looked at this problem. Jesus has known the solution to it, you know. And will I take for myself the humility to bring that to him? I think is a takeaway.
I think mine is seeing how Jesus sees every, if you want to say, character in this story, and uses them in the best of ways. Like, he sees them all. So as somebody who's kind of experienced maybe exile from church, I can look at this and say, there's like these levels of power to get to Jesus, and I see Jesus just walking straight through them to the least of these. He walks right past the religious leaders who I have no idea, but maybe they had expectations like, oh, he's going to come preach at our synagogue tonight, or like we got the cool guy in town as the speaker, or I don't know what their expectations were. Maybe they didn't want him at all. Then to the power of this centurion who is a Gentile. And many people in this crowd didn't deserve the presence of Jesus, and yet there were just relationally some that thought he was, all the way down to this servant who Jesus didn't physically go to, but in my mind, that is the image of sort of religious leaders expecting Jesus to be there for them, to this Gentile leader who has a lot of faith that maybe he came for him too, to a potential Gentile servant who is sick. And Jesus walking through all of these layers and not dismissive. He isn't dismissive of the religious leaders in this story. He does kind of tick them off. We didn't go into that in Matthew, but I think when he talks about the great feast, but there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, it could have been a little.
Those from the east and the west and the north and south will come, but those who are already of the family will be thrown out.
Yes, and I think he's showing them once again their expectations were maybe not what he actually came for. But that makes me think about today in 2024 in Temple, Texas. What does that look like? And where do you expect Jesus to show up? And where is he, in some sense, walking past them? Not that he's ignoring them. He sees them. But where is he walking right past your expectations to the least of these?
That's good.
Mm-hmm. And I would agree what Kay said. Mine out of this, I come to the servant that Jesus knew. And felt the pain, and then we can look at the next story coming up, but not in this and that. And these others are sort of not by, but that was the focus. And we look at all this others, but that at the bottom line, there was a servant who was known by pretty much nobody. The centurion knew him because the person, but Jesus healed that person. Mm-hmm. He cared and navigated all these other stuff. And at the end of the day, if you would have drawn the list of people, society would say, hey, go do a miracle for that one. This would have been one of the last ones on the list. But he did. And that's the God even today. And I also am like Jonah. I want to know, do I truly come before him and believe that I'm all in? Mm-hmm. And then Jonah said something that's really scary. And like this, I trust your answer. Because sometimes I don't ask. Sometimes I don't go to him because I'm afraid of what the answer may be.
Yeah.
Because I do believe the truth that what he says, it will be. So sometimes I don't have the faith to go, I know you can do this, and I trust that you will do it. So mine, interesting story, great discussion in it.
We got to get out of here so Karen can get something to eat.
It's true. It's time for second breakfast.
We do appreciate y'all being here. We'll take it up again next week. And we say every time, as this story and every one we look at, we would say scripturally, and we hope to live by this, people matter. People matter. And then if you are hearing this, okay, you cannot deny the fact that you are a person. And the truth applies to you as well as everybody else. You matter. So appreciate y'all being here and hope y'all have a great rest of the day.
The Collage Podcast is produced by Bobby Jeffers in association with Feed My Sheep. Hosts are Jeff Stiegel, Karen Smith, Jonah Fox, and myself, Roy Rhodes. If you enjoy the podcast, please leave us a review on Apple Podcast or on whatever platform you're listening. Or like, share, subscribe, and get in the comments if you're watching on YouTube. We'd love to hear from you, so shoot us an email at digitalmedia@feedmysheeptemple.org. And may you be nourished for your journey with God.